You. Uh,
Assalamu alaikum everyone. I am Manahil Remote Job Wali and I am delighted to be here today to introduce our esteemed guest. We have the pleasure of hosting a truly remarkable individual, Mr. Alex, whose life journey is nothing short of extraordinary. Today we will delve in the various chapters of Alex's life from his dedicated study sorry of the Japanese language and history to his experiences as a teacher, aide in special education, followed by his courageous role as a teamster, trad, unionist, and truck driver in the city of potentially pursuing dual citizenship in Russia. So, without further ado, let's warmly welcome to Alex and embark on his fascinating journey of discovering into his life experiences and insight. Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
Not too bad. Yeah, just getting over a new COVID inoculation. They updated my COVID vaccine a few days ago. So yeah,
Okay,
yep,
all right. So, sir, please introduce yourself for my viewers.
sure. My name is Alex, and I'm living for the time now in Michigan. One side of the family was part of the founding wave of the state in 1840 or 1850. Um, and Michigan is in the middle of the USA, was most famous for Detroit, to which I'm not that far away. Detroit was sort of, the joke was it was the Petrograd of North America, or kind of a labor militant city of auto factories, etc., and one of the biggest manufacturing centers in the world. I don't know if that's still true given all of the offshoring, thanks to our slimy liberal overlords. But um, yeah, so that's Michigan. Yeah. And I was in Chicago for 24 years, unfortunately. Chicago is kind of like, in terms of Russia, Rostov na Donu, or Tambov, very corrupt, or Odessa, actually, Odessa, port city, but very corrupt, criminal, uh, you know, kind of, yeah. So, um, and there I worked as a laborer, teamster, a teacher aide, uh, in a liberal high school in special education for 7 years. And then for 15 years, unfortunately, I was a federal anti corruption hire, a teamster, which means like a trade unionist truck driver, with the city of Chicago. And there I helped out the reform faction inside my trade union local, and basically helped to, or led pickets against the machine that would steal our work and sell it to the mafia. Basically attacking, uh, first and foremost, the African American population of the city, the working class population, that is. To the benefit of slimy, mostly Irish and Italian reject capitalists, and to a lesser extent Mexican corrupt elements in the city. So, yep.
All right, great. Thank you so much for your introduction. So now
Sure.
let's move on to next. Now let's move on to questions. My first question is on your screen. Can you
Hmm.
tell me about your experience
Oh, okay.
studying Japanese language and history from 1987 in 1992? What motivated you to pursue this field of study?
Well, the um studying Japanese was kind of a roundabout way. Um, in terms of, I was interested in the history of the last 100 years. In terms of my father's family, uh, they were all basically murdered in the Second World War. And mostly, I would say, because they were Soviet Jews over in Soviet Belarus, and they were perceived as being pro-Soviet or even communist. And so I wanted to know, why did that occur? Why did the genocide occur? Well, fascism. Why did fascism occur? Well, in the end, capitalism. Who sent the Nazis, to the Soviet Union, to Soviet Belarus? Well, so I wanted to study Russian at first, but the powers that be denied me the ability to study Russian in high school. So I devolved to German, right? I studied German because they were a very civilized country, but they turned fascist, and they were the Nazis. So I wanted to know what went wrong. Well, no answers there. Oops, my screen went dark. Oh, there we go. No answers there for years. I couldn't get a straight answer. Basically everyone was lying. And in the course of that, I what? I had a buddy who was an exchange student from Bavaria, and I went to stay with him after high school. And they had a photo of his uncle, who was a priest, right, a Roman Catholic priest. But the uncle was in his SS dress uniform, right? So the worst of the fascist murderers. He was in his uniform in a photo on the wall in the room where I stayed. And my conclusion was, well, I can't really be around Germany because I would kill them. It's sort of like, you going to Britain and then having, a photo of some British imperialist murderer, you know, on the wall at home. And, their uncle was basically murdered, people in Pakistan, during the Raj. Right. So I said, well, the Japanese, at least they're Asians, they're very interesting. They're very dedicated and committed. Of course, they were famous for Bushido, the code of the warrior. And I identified with that, kind of as, someone who identified as a communist. And then our movement 100 years prior, or less than, when I was young, your age, they refer to themselves as Red Samurai. So I think that was part of the attraction, was the Japanese like total commitment to you know, whatever their movement was. um, and so, yeah, so I began to study Japanese when in 1987, I want to say, the language. And I learned a year of university Japanese in 3 months, like kind of studying by myself. And then I went to university. I studied Japanese for 4 years at Rutgers University in New Jersey. Then I ended up in Fukuoka University, and for a year, 1990 to 1991. And I studied the language there and some of the economics, took some economics classes and history classes, kind of the first level, first year, or maybe a little higher perhaps. At Fukuoka University, it was basically a teacher's college, in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, so that's basically how I studied, Japanese language, history, society, culture, etc. So, yep.
All right, sir. Great answer. Thank you so much for your answer. So now let's move on to next question. My next question is, your career took a significant turn in 2006 when you become a team master, tried a unionist and truck driver in the city of Chicago. Can you discuss your role and responsibilities during that period?
Sure. Okay. So, basically, first I had to get certified. So I had to have a commercial driver's license, which meant I had to go through a training school. I did that. It was a bad school. It was in Chicago, and it was run by basically some Polish kulak who was just trying to make money, and didn't really train us properly. But at any rate, so and the other problem I had was everything in the state of Illinois, it's one of the most corrupt states in our country. Um, so I couldn't get hired until 2006, but luckily I had just gotten my commercial driver's certification, uh, a year or two before that, maybe a year before. And so, excuse me, um, what? So I couldn't get hired until 2006. Well, what happened was, because of a scandal regarding safety in the water department, which led to a scandal where Mayor Daley, the mayor at the time, was selling the work of the drivers to the mafia, and basically Mexican illegal workers, Ukrainian illegal workers, I guess, uh, and through the mafia, one could say, or just dirty capitalists. Um, that the FBI, the situation became so outrageous, the FBI, or federal police, were forced to act. They raided the city personnel department. And before, where the city would have code words in, say, the cover letters of these mopes who would pretend to work for the city or actually work for the city, and then know by these code words in the letters to hire these people because they were politically connected. Well, they were threatened with prison if they continued that. So they were so afraid they just approved everyone, including myself, who applied. In, I guess it was the late summer of 2006. So I got hired. I went to O'Hare Airport. I was on basically security detail. I trained for snow removal on the airfield, on the taxiways. So if you land in a plane at O'Hare, Airport on the runway has to be cleaned during the winter. It has to be cleaned of snow or debris or anything like that, right? It's very important that there be no ice or rocks or whatever on the runway. So that was our detail, which and maybe there's like during the winter season, 200 to 300 workers there doing this, just clearing snow and making sure the runways and the taxiways are clean. So that was my first job, and then I went on to transportation, where I was mainly driving a 10-ton truck full of what's called cold patch, this cold asphalt, and working with like 3 or 4 laborers in this cab. I drive around the whole city, west side, south side, mostly, sometimes northwest side. And, we'd stop at a location. They get out with shovels. I tip the truck bed up, and then we'd put this asphalt in the potholes. We have many potholes in Chicago because, the ground freezes, gets down to minus 40 centigrades, or not centigrade, Fahrenheit. I think even centigrade, it's the same temperature, but it's very, very cold sometimes in Chicago. So the ground shrinks and then it expands in the spring, and you get these holes opening up in the road. So we would just do whatever they call it, just as you went along, you repair the holes. And then so I did that for like 1-2 seasons. Went to the water department. Worked a variety of jobs there. There were some exciting times in terms of coming across drug markets, one shootout, one drug bazaar. What else did we have? Oh, and then I was driving 20 tons, these big tractor trailer dump trucks, and I drive up to mostly like water pipe repair, and they would cut out an old water pipe. Sometimes they were so old, they'd be more than 100 years old. They'd be wooden pipes. So they'd take out the pipe and they dump it in the bed of my truck, which was very large. It was like, I don't know how many meters long. Maybe, what would it be, 10 to 15 meters long, truck bed, and then a big tractor trailer I drive. And then, I take all this, 60,000 pounds of what they call spoil. I drive it to Mikey Vondra Reliable Dump in Chicago on the south side. I'd go up, to this big, muddy area, and then we dump all of that waste, that spoil, we called it, pick up more gravel, come back, and then the gravel would be used to like fill in where they put the new pipe in and, connected the pipe, etc. So people would have, clean drinking water, etc. And then that work got stolen in 2009, 2010. Richard M. Daley again. He, what? The son of his secretary, Buonanno, I think the scumbag's name was, and Vondra and Victor Reyes, this other scumbag from Mexico. Basically, they offered Daley and his political organization, the 11th Ward of Chicago, a bribe. I think it was $11,000 to steal 200 drivers' work. Most of those drivers were African American, basically more or less native to Chicago, from the last 100 years at least. And excuse me. And then he gave the work to Michael Vondra and whoever Buonanno and Reyes were associated with. And then they got like basically Mexican criminals, gang members, Ukrainian illegal, scab. We call them scabs. They're non-union, filth. And they, they stole the work of the mostly black, indigenous to Chicago workforce. So we had no work for, a season or so. And we protested this, we picketed the departments and the job sites and the dump. And, there was a small scandal, but, most of Chicago is either criminal or liberal. And so they don't care. They're not really workers. So most of Chicago, or half of Chicago, let's say half of Chicago, and, the half that counts, it's sort of like, I don't know if you're familiar with like Istanbul, or probably in Pakistan, you have a similar situation where you have, all these peasants come in from all over the world. They come to Chicago and they're upper middle class and they get office jobs and they don't care about workers, right? So anything the mafia or the political machine, which represents these upper middle class scum, does to the working class of the city, they don't care about, right? So basically that was the situation. And then when we protested, well, our work was stolen in water, so we went back to the airport, and the slime bag, Daley, who was mayor, then retaliated against us for protesting his criminal action by cutting our hours from 40 hours a week in the winter to like, what was it? 2 times 5, what's that? 10 hours a week. So we cut our hours by, what is that? However many hours, 30 hours a week. So no one could really survive on that. And he did that for, to some of the drivers, including myself, the second season into 2011, I guess it was. I didn't get the worst of it, but so, and that went on. Then we got a favorable ruling against that. But what I learned was most of the drivers I worked with had been hired politically, right? Even though the federal police came in and threatened the filth that run the city of Chicago with prison, unless they, hired without political prejudice. Even that being the case, a lot of the drivers I ended up working with were political hires anyway, or they were afraid to confront, the criminal mayor, right, and protest at City Hall. So at that point, I knew, being a labor activist with these people was a lost cause. They were just too politically compromised, and in many cases corrupt, and in other cases criminal. Half the city of Chicago is basically a criminal conspiracy, I would say, or criminal enterprise, let's call it. So, so then after 2011, I finished up in the end, 2021, 10 more years to get, a partial pension. and I was illegally fired by basically this Nazi who got her job through not really knowing her job, but through political social connections with, again, Daley, this Irish American piece of garbage, that basically runs the city into the ground. So, yeah. So basically, that was my experience. I should have moved to Russia or maybe over here to Detroit. Michigan here is one of the least corrupt states. Illinois and Chicago is one of the most corrupt states. So, yeah, I probably should have moved to Michigan, years ago, if not Russia. Yeah, so that's about it.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir. I really like your answer. Thank you so much for your answer. So now let's
Sure.
move on to next question. My next question is on your screen. Like you mentioned, living in Japan from 1990 to
Uh-huh.
1991. Could you share some of your most memorable experiences or culture insights from that time?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Um, sure. So in Japan, um, geez, how should I say? I mean, it was very interesting. It was sort of like, I didn't know much about Japanese people as Japanese people, right? Excuse me, or Japanese society, or yeah, like for real. Until I got to Japan, and what I found, I guess, was that most Japanese are kind of a soft socialist pacifist. When I was there, this was back in more than 30 years ago, I guess it is now. Um, that at that point at least, and I think it's probably still uh, more or less not untrue, true today, but that. Uh, so most Japanese, they've gone through the experience of the war and fascism. And, when I was there, they were very pacifist oriented. It was a very peaceful, relatively. I mean, it was very oppressive. Historically, in Japan, they say tate shakai, which means vertical society. So it's very much like England, right? I used to joke, people would say, "Oh, what was Japan like?" I used to joke, well, it's sort of like a cross between Vietnam, Disneyland, and Nazi Germany. Right? So the uh, the ruling party were basically CIA collaborators, and they were scum. Uh, but most people, they had the politics gerrymandered, in Tokyo, to favor the rich farmers who would reelect these, right wing scum. But most people, even in the backwards area I was in the middle of nowhere, they generally, I would say, yeah, they were kind of socialist party inclined and pacifist inclined. Uh, and so, what? Yeah, so, it was generally, um, I would say, relatively friendly. I mean, it was kind of repressive, also reserved. It's an island country, that went through hundreds of years of feudal oppression. But what else? There's certain, memories I have of, say, I went to some sort of bar. I think it was near Tsuruga, which is an old Korean word. The Koreans haven't come over to this part of Japan, like central Western Japan, right across from Korea. And anyway, they had a bar there, and the fishermen would come in. And so one night, I went out with some professor, and the hostess brings out this fresh, maybe live fish, and they cut it up into sashimi, right? And so it was like absolutely fresh, like in terms of the culinary aspect of things. Um, it was, some of the it was the best Japanese food, right? And Japanese food is at a very high level, right? The Japanese have developed and refined their civilization through centuries, and so this sashimi, it was absolutely fresh. The shoyu, the soy sauce, absolutely fresh, from next door, in the soybean fields. The rice, absolutely fresh. The water, absolutely pure. The sake, absolutely pure and wonderful. And so that aspect of just the peasants, the farming, the food, just it was wonderful. Um, the and you walk along the streets, and generally it's a very clean country and orderly. Uh, and so what? Um, they're very conscientious, I guess, in terms of their culture. Um, and I guess they're like the English or the Germans or the Belaruskis. Actually, my paternal side is Belaruski, White Russian, and it's similar to that. Um, uh, what else can I say? It is xenophobic. It's an island in Northeast Asia, and basically the fascists had ruled Japan from what 1920 odd, 22, whenever the year was, I forget. They had conducted brutal occupations against the Koreans and the Chinese, the Manchurians, the Filipinos, etc. Uh, so there was that sort of level of social political repression, but nevertheless, uh, the I'd say the majority of people, the large majority of people, were um, what conscientious, well put together, um, kind of humanist, let's say, in their orientation, more so than the U.S. You know, um, yeah, I would say. I mean, just through their experience of like they had a communist party, they had a socialist party, they had peasant rebellions, they had workers' rebellions, they had a very militant student movement in the '60s, and so what? And so all of that served to counter the CIA fascist influence, kind of dominating politically the country and economically, I guess, too, over the country. Uh, and what else can I say about Japan? Yeah, I mean, the language was interesting. It's they call it Altaic or Altai language. So it's similar to like Central Asian languages. I take it in Pakistan, northern India. Historically, you guys were invaded, settled by the Mughals, right? And the Central Asians who came swept down, who were like Mongolian Altai people, and then the Dravidians kind of went up, and then I guess somehow the Aryans were in there too. Um, but so Japanese language is similar to Korean, Mongolian, Kazakh, Uzbek languages. So it's like subject, object, verb, um, and yeah, and it tends to be kind of like a glottal, whatever they call it, a agglutinative maybe, or glottal. I forget all the linguistics about it. It's been more than 30 years, but yeah, it's interesting, um, linguistically and culturally, historically. So
All right, great. Thank you so much for your answer. So, as we bring our conversation with Mr. Alex to a close, I'd like to express our sincere gratitude for sharing your incredible life journey with us today. Your experiences from your time in Japan to your work in education and your activism as a teamster have provided us a valuable insight and inspiration. We are truly privileged to have had you as our guest, and your stories serve as reminder of power of resilience, adaptability, and the pursuits of one's patience. Your plans for the future, including the possibility of dual citizenship in Russia, remind us that life is a continuous adventure filled with opportunities. On behalf of our audience and myself, I want to extend our heartfelt thank you to Mr. Alex for your time, your stories, and your wisdom. We wish you all the best in your future endeavors and hope to hear more about your adventures as they unfold. Thank you once again for being here with us today.
Okay, thank you, Manahil. Good to meet you.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. So, bye. Have a wonderful day ahead.